things a lot better. So let me see here. Thought I saw, there's Ken. Give you co-host access, Ken. Hold
Good
on.
morning. I was late. I was wrapping up Morning Ascent. Sorry.
All right. Hold on a second. Huh. Well, I'm going to end up making you host, Ken. It's not giving me the option for co-host. So just so you know, but
Okay.
So you have the power.
Oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do with all of this.
Yeah. So what I was just telling everybody, and Ken, want to make sure you're aware. So the old link that we've used all year long, last year, whatever, is gone. That's done. So this text message, this new Zoom login and everything, and I'll give you the access. But that should be the new access for everybody. So hopefully it works.
Okay.
And we'll move forward with it.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everybody. Good to see you here this morning on our call. The topic for today is we were going to talk about the Code of Ethics. And so we're going to kind of go through that. We're going to do it in two parts. Today I'll cover first part of the Code of Ethics, and then next week Rob cover the rest of it. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Ken, one last thing to jump into this, and let's remember to do this at the end as well. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So one thing, next month in April, the first 2 weeks, April 5th and the 12th, we will not be having the compliance call. Just so you know, that the second week of April is the day that we'll have Summit. So as a reminder, the weeks that we have Summit, we're not going to be having this class, but then that first week dealing with the company Hawaii thing, we're not going to have it that week either, but just as a reminder. So sorry about that. Go ahead and take over.
All right, sounds good. So can everybody see my screen that I'm sharing? So this is the Code of Ethics. Every year, the National Association of Realtors adopts a Code of Ethics. And so you can see on this Code of Ethics by the National Association of Realtors, it has January 1st, 2022. So each year, these Code of Ethics are reviewed and adopted by the Board of Directors of the National Association of Realtors. And then they're sent out to us as members of that board, telling us how our behavior should be governed. And so here at the top, it says, while the Code of Ethics establishes obligations that may be higher than those mandated by law. So these are not minimum standards. These are standards of conduct that may be beyond those that are allowed by law. So I just wanted to point that out, that this, we're not following just the bare minimum that's been governed by law. That this is a code of ethical and lawful conduct. And there's this preamble, and if you read this preamble to the Code of Ethics, it's quite patriotic, and it's almost like the preamble to the Constitution. It's really kind of amazing. But basically, what it says is that us as realtors are given the obligation and the privilege of helping people with the highest level that an American citizen can achieve, and that's land ownership. That we're helping people with that, and that we should take that seriously, and we should take it with honor to help people in that endeavor to realize the American dream and to own real estate. So that's pretty cool. Now, the Code of Ethics are broken into several sections. The section that we're going to be talking about today is the section that has to do with our duty as realtors to our clients and to our customers. So everything we're going to talk about today is the ethical component of us dealing with our clients and our customers. There's other parts of the code of ethics that talk about how we deal with the public and how we deal with one another as professionals in this industry. But today we're going to be talking about those articles that talk about how we are to conduct ourselves when dealing with clients, okay? So Article 1 is the first article in the Code of Ethics. And Article 1 says, when representing a buyer or seller, landlord, tenant, or other client as an agent, realtors pledge themselves to protect and to promote the interest of their clients. So our first charge is to protect and promote the interest of our clients, not our interests. It's to promote the interest and to protect our clients' interests. So we are not to be self-serving in the process of helping them, okay? And then you come down after we've talked about this, the Article 1 and what Article 1 is covering. Then we have these standards of practice. And there's standards of practice 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And I'm not going to talk about every one of these. I'm going to talk about the ones that I think are most relative to us and the ones that we have to deal with almost on a daily basis. So the first one I want, yeah, go ahead.
Since the one thing I point out, oftentimes agents look at the standard of practice versus the article, and they'll look at the standard of practice of saying, oh, okay, I'm guilty of standard of practice 1.6. And that's the one thing that I could be in violation of. The way that the Code of Ethics works is you're in violation of the article, not the standard of practice. The standard of practice is there to be somewhat of a guide to understand what the article is. But you are in violation of Article 1 if 1.6, standard of practice 1.6 was the definition of what you thought you were in violation of. You're in violation of the article, not just any of the standard of practice. It's the article that supersedes everything.
Good. Thanks for pointing that out, Rob. That's a great point. So these standards of practice are kind of the situations or the practices that we may be involved in that are supported by Article 1. And like I said, Article 1 is to protect and promote the interest of the client, not our interest. So I want to talk about 1.4 here, where it says realtors, when seeking to become a buyer tenant representative, shall not mislead buyers or tenants as to the savings or other benefits that might be realized through the use of a realtor service. So we should be honest in making those representations. I think one of the ways that this is most commonly violated is that when we're a listing agent and we say to a buyer, we're in an open house, right? We're holding an open house. And the listing agent says to the buyer, oh, if you use me, then there could be some cost savings to you in using me as the listing agent. So making, not making representations that are not necessarily true or that don't have the benefit that they seem to. So there's a situation where you could be in violation of this if you're trying to coerce or to convince a buyer to go with you as the listing agent versus their own buyer's agent, because you've created a financial incentive for them to do that. So standard practice 1.5, realtors, and stop me if you guys have any questions or comments on these as well. So standard practice 1.5, realtors may represent the seller, landlord, or buyer tenant in the same transaction only after full disclosure to and with informed consent of both parties. So this article obviously has to do with limited agency. That we may represent both parties in a transaction only after full disclosure. We do that through the limited agency agreement and with their written informed consent. Are there any questions on that, on limited agency? Okay. So let's go to standard practice 1.6. Realtors may submit offers and counter offers objectively and as quickly as possible. So we're kind of getting into this territory a little bit, you know, with the way that agents are trying to kind of stretch out showing periods and offer periods. This standard of practice says that they should be submitted objectively and as quickly as possible. So we should be doing those in a timely manner. Rob, do you have any comment on that?
Just as a whole, kind of, if you can go back up to the opening paragraph, the key part about this article, when we see complaints or when the professional standards or grievance committee, they see complaints that come across, Article 1 is kind of like the catch-all. So even though what Ken has highlighted here in yellow is talking about the best interests of their client, if you continue to read the remaining amount of this, it's basically their client and everybody else. It says this obligation to the client is primary, but it does not relieve realtors of their obligation to treat all parties honestly when serving a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, or other party in a non-agency capacity. Realtors remain obligated to treat all parties honestly. So this article ends up being kind of the catch-all when, whether it be the public, whether it be our client, the other side feels that we've done something that has been represented as dishonest. This article is what is always cited.
That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up, and I need to correct how I've highlighted that, because it does require us to treat all parties honestly in the transaction and fairly. So that's a great point. I want to go down here to standard practice 1.9. The obligation of realtors to preserve confidential information provided by their clients in the course of this agency relationship or non-agency relationship recognized by law continues after termination of agency relationship or any non-agency relationship recognized by law. Realtors shall not knowingly during or following the termination of this professional relationship with their client. So we should not reveal confidential information about our client during or after the process of the transaction. And I think where sometimes this comes into play is when we're providing copies of a client's earnest money check, or we're providing verification of funds. Often the client will send us that information and it has their account numbers on the bank account or on the check. And we simply send that information off to the listing agent or to the lender or someone else involved in the transaction. And we're actually sharing confidential information about our client with other parties. So we need to make sure that we're protecting them.
It's even as simple as the phone number. What if we represent the buyer and the listing agent is saying, hey, is it okay if my client wants to reach out to the buyer? Do you have their contact? Do you have their phone number? Or whatever it is. We give that phone number. Same thing. We could be breaching that confidentiality duty by just giving that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or by forwarding an email. We have an email, our client sends us a document and we simply forward that email to the other side. And now what happens? the listing agent now has your buyer's email addresses, and that's also considered confidential. So just something as simple as forwarding an email without taking care of your client's email addresses is something that they could be very, very unhappy with, that you shared their confidential information. So very important. Protect their account information, protect their confidential information, those kinds of things. And you need to do that in perpetuity, even after the transaction. So, all right, let's go to Article Standard of Practice 115. Realtors, in response to inquiries from buyers or cooperating brokers, shall, with their seller's approval, disclose the existence of offers on the property. Where disclosure is authorized, realtors may also disclose, if asked, whether offers were obtained by the listing licensee, another licensee in the listing firm, or by a cooperating broker. So I get this question all the time. Do I have to disclose that I've written an offer on a listing of mine? Does the listing agent have to disclose to me if I ask them if they've written an offer on their own listing? Here's the answer to that question. In response to an inquiry from a buyer or cooperating broker, with the seller's approval. That's very key. I want to emphasize that. You have to have the seller's approval in order to do that. Why is that important, that you have the seller's approval?
Because you're representing the seller, and it's they need to understand the risk and the benefits to it,
Yeah.
so that they know if that's something they want to do.
Yeah. What could be the downside to that, Jeanette, if I, as the listing agent, represented to a cooperating broker that I actually wrote an offer on the listing? What could be the consequence of that?
Well, for the seller, it could be maybe they're not going to even present an offer. You know, they're going to, you know, if you let other agents know that you have offers, they might decide, well, we don't want to be in a bidding war, so no, we're going to write an offer. And they could have potentially wrote one of the best offers.
Yep, exactly right. You hit the nail right on the head. It could have a chilling effect or a discouraging effect on other cooperating brokers presenting an offer on the property, and that is not in the seller's best interest. So when we're discussing, you know, what the seller wants us to disclose and what they don't want us to disclose, that should be part of the conversation. If I'm asked, if I do represent a buyer on this property and I'm asked, what do you want my answer to be? What can I disclose? You need to have their permission, just like anything else. Even to be able to disclose whether you have offers on the property or not requires the seller's permission. Okay. Any questions on that? That's one that we get asked all the time. All right, let's go to Article 2. So this is the next section of the Code of Ethics. So it says, realtors shall avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts relating to the property in the transaction. Realtors shall not, however, be obligated to discover latent defects in the property, to advise on matters outside the scope of their real estate license, or to disclose facts which are confidential under the scope of agency as defined by law. So this has many, many points to it. And these are very significant points in a real estate transaction. So we are not to exaggerate, misrepresent, or conceal pertinent facts about the property. What could that be? What do you think some of the pertinent facts about the property might be? How about in the course of listing the property, the seller tells you that the property, that the basement has flooded, that the basement flooded 6 months ago. Is that a pertinent fact about the property?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pertinent fact about the property, and that's something that should be disclosed. Something that would be outside of the scope. Rob, can you think of anything that might be outside the scope of our licensure? That's talking about?
I have a situation that I experienced a while back. Can I mention it?
Yeah,
So I helped a buyer buy a property, and we got the plat map and we knew the boundaries, but it was in the country, so everything wasn't exactly right. And after my buyers closed on the property, they found out that the neighbors were actually in the process of possibly suing or trying to do something with the property to take more of the land with the previous owners. And they never disclosed anything about the easement or anything, that there was a problem with it. Would that be something that should have been disclosed?
yeah, absolutely. Yep, the
That one-
lawsuit, potential lawsuit. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, that one, in the seller disclosures, there's actually a question specifically that says, do you know of any active or pending lawsuit? Now, that lawsuit, if it hasn't been filed, there's nothing official from the seller disclosure point of view, they can look at and say, hey, it's not active, it's not a pending lawsuit, so we didn't have any need to disclose. That's what I would definitely say is, hey, look, you might want to consult with an attorney, because anybody can make a threat of saying, hey, I'm going to sue you. Do you disclose every threat? Yes or no. But it certainly could be a scenario where if there is a boundary or an easement issue, then that's probably the thing that I would bring up, of saying, hey, this easement was in question. We went and had it resolved. Here is the results that we are fine. Great. Now go ahead and resolve that. The neighbor may disagree with it and still continue to pursue it, but at least you could argue and say, hey, we've addressed this issue. They just won't, they're not going to let it go. But if there has continued to be some type of an easement or boundary issue in that example, and you don't say anything, yeah, that potentially could be a problem.
That's a good point. And there actually is a question on the disclosures about boundaries and easements. So, they're going to have to answer that question, and they need to do so honestly.
I think I have one that you might be looking at. It was a rental home that the tenants were evicted due to meth. And the seller went in and remodeled the whole thing, and it was all it was totally within the qualification of the law now. So I believe that this is how that goes, is that and this is how I handled it, is that you do not disclose anything of that history unless you're asked. If you're asked, then I have to answer. Is that true?
Partially. What I would say, you said you don't disclose anything, and I would say that depends
only
on what the seller would want.
Only if I'm asked.
Well,
Because
again,
it was totally within the guidance of the law now.
Hold on a second, Rebecca. The
Okay.
seller may be openly wanting to disclose that.
Oh,
So
well,
the key part is this: we do not have to disclose unless asked. If it's been remediated and now it's below the legal limit, dealing with meth in that example. But when you said that you do not disclose, I said, well, that's
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit aggressive of a statement. Depends on what the seller would like to do.
Right.
But
And
in
this seller
regards-
did not want it
In regards
disclosed,
to
but
stigmatized, we're right there, we're talking about a stigmatized property, which meth falls under. That part, then if it's below the legal limit and it has been decontaminated, remediated, then we do not have to disclose unless asked. That's what I wanted to clarify on the language.
Yeah,
So-
go ahead.
Well, there was another one that the seller's husband committed suicide. It was not in the home. It was right behind it in the park. Well, not the park, but the Jordan River walkway. So as far as I know, even if they did it in the home, you don't have to disclose.
That's also
Unless asked.
that's
It's the
also
same
considered a
thing.
stigmatized
Right.
issue. If somebody were to pass away in the house,
But if it wasn't in the house, that has nothing to do with the house, or does it because it was one of the owners?
Even if it did happen in the house in the state of Utah, you don't have to disclose that
unless asked.
unless asked. The meth situation is tricky because the way that's handled varies by county. So for example, in Salt Lake County, when it comes to meth, the county health department regulates how meth is taken care of in Salt Lake County. The state approved contractor for meth has to submit a remediation plan to the county. It has to be approved. The county oversees the remediation process. And then the county ultimately gives a clean bill of health on the property, saying that the property is clean. Here in Davis County does not do that. They don't even record meth contaminations on property. So it's handled two different ways in two different counties. And so you have to understand how it's handled in the county in which the listing resides in order to do that properly. But once the property has been cleaned by a state licensed contractor and the level is below the legal limit, then as far as the state law is concerned, it doesn't need to be disclosed. However, if asked, then yes, you would need to disclose that.
As far as a written report, would we, some have a copy of that or just advise them?
I would have a copy of that in case asked.
Mhm.
And it's something that you'd probably want to verify yourself. I would, if I was listing the property, I wouldn't want to take my seller's word for it, that it was remediated and that it was
Yeah, exactly.
satisfactory. Because you're going to make that representation. Wouldn't you want to verify that
Mm-hmm.
information for yourself before you make that representation?
Yes.
Otherwise, you could be liable as well.
Yep.
So I would definitely want a copy of the health department's report if it's in a county that requires it done that way, or if it's not, like in Davis County, you get a copy of the report from the state approved contractor. Okay, any more questions on that? Okay, those are good questions. So Article 2 is pretty short, and it's very concise in what it's talking about. So Article 3, realtors shall cooperate with other brokers except when cooperation is not in the client's best interest. The obligation to cooperate does not include the obligation to share commissions. So there's the saying in real estate, cooperation does not equal compensation. And I think often we get confused on that cooperation equals compensation. Not necessarily the case. Protect yourself, understand what the level of compensation is when you are in a cooperation agreement with a party. Rob, do you have anything you want to say about that?
No, I think it's pretty clear.
Okay, so let's go on to standard of practice 3.1. Realtors acting as exclusive agents or brokers for sellers, landlords, establish the terms and conditions of offers to cooperate. Unless expressly indicated in offers to cooperate, cooperating brokers may not assume that the offer of cooperation includes the offer of compensation. Terms of compensation, if any, shall be shall be asserted by cooperating brokers before beginning efforts to accept the offer of cooperation. So very important. Know before you go. Know what you're going to get paid before you go forward with an offer. Okay, know before you go. Pretty straightforward. 3.2, any change in compensation offered for cooperative services must be communicated to other realtors prior to the time realtor has submitted an offer on the property. After a realtor has submitted an offer to the property, the listing agent may not attempt to unilaterally modify the offered compensation with respect to the cooperative transaction. Pretty straightforward, okay? You take a listing, you offer compensation. Once an offer comes, that compensation can't be unilaterally changed. If you've been in the business any amount of time, you've probably been involved in a situation where that's happened to you. I know I have. Agent offered one commission. I submitted an offer. Next thing I know, the commission has been reduced on the listing on the MLS. You can't do that. How do you protect yourself in that case?
You send the MLS agreement, listing information that's on the MLS with your offer.
Yep, that's a great way to do it. Or at least print it off and have it in your records. It's very short-sighted for an agent to do that, because how easy is it for you to go back and prove at a specific date in which they changed the compensation? All you got to do is go back to the history on the listing, and the compensation reduction is listed as to the date it was changed. Rob, do you have something to say?
Yeah, this goes under this article. The other thing that, as a listing agent, that you're unable to do, you're unable to even ask the buyer's agent if they're willing to reduce their commission. So say like a buyer submits an offer, and you've got 2 or 3 offers that are there, and the buyer's agent asks, hey, what can we do to make our offer more competitive? And the listing agent says, well, if you were to reduce some of your commission, that would make it more competitive. You can't do that. Now, the buyer's agent can ask the question, hey, what can we do? And let's say you as a listing agent, you're like, you know what, that's a great question. I'm sure there's some things that might be available to you. What are some things that you're thinking about doing to improve your offer? You'd have to come back and ask more of an open-ended question to get the buyer's agent themselves. Well, if we were to reduce our commission, would that have any impact? That's a great question. That would make it more competitive. But we cannot direct the buyer's agent at all to ask them, insinuate, lead them to reducing their commission. They've got to propose that on their own.
That's a great point. All right, standard practice 3.3 does not preclude the listing broker and cooperating broker from entering into an agreement to change cooperative compensation. So along Rob's point, it can be done, but it needs to be done with the approval of all parties, and it needs to be done in writing. Okay, we need to have that done in writing, and it needs to be done by all parties. So it can be done, it just has to be done the proper way. And like Rob says, you can't ask for that to be the case if you're the listing agent. All right, standard practice 3.4. Acting as listing broker, have an affirmative obligation to disclose the existence of dual or variable rate commissions if the listing firm is the procuring cause in the sale, and a different amount of compensation is payable if the sale or lease results through the efforts of the seller landlord. It's a little bit of confusing language there, but basically in a variable rate commission, and I don't see this very often, maybe you see it more than I do, Rob, but in a variable rate situation, the seller may say to you as the listing agent, hey, if you bring the buyer, then I'm willing to pay X number of dollars in compensation. If someone from your office brings the buyer, then I'm willing to pay Y compensation for that. And if an outside broker brings the buyer, then I'm going to pay X compensation to that buyer's agent for bringing the buyer. So that's what variable rate means, is that depending on who brings the buyer, then a different level of compensation is offered for each of those different buyer's agents.
So I have a comment on that. Down in Washington County, it's quite often that you see on the listing in the agent remarks that if they are an agent outside of Utah County, that they will only pay this percentage versus the percentage that's in the listing, but they've disclosed it. And I have a hard time believing that that's under the direction of the seller, but is there a breach there?
Okay, so there's two parts that are here. What they're implying is if you're not a member of their MLS, they're disclosing what compensation they're going to have. So what you would need to do if you're not a member of their MLS, you have to get an escrow instruction agreement to solve that. So they're saying, hey, in our MLS, we're paying this. If you're not a member of our MLS, we're going to pay that if you're an agent. So they're making a comment from that perspective. But if it were part of the same MLS, let's say up here in Salt Lake, that someone said, if you're an agent in Utah County, even though it's the same MLS, they could not do that. The key part about this is understanding what dual and variable rate are. Ken explain where the variable rate on your ERS, your MLS input form, it asks, is this a dual or variable? Is there you have to provide yes or no on that answer. Dual or variable rate, yes or no.
Oh, wow. So they have to have that checked in order to do all that, is
Well,
what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that's on the Flex MLS down in Utah County. I don't know it well enough to know if they even asked this question. Up in Salt Lake County, it is one of the main questions that have to be answered just to upload a listing. And that I'm pretty sure because it has to be disclosed. So I would assume that on the Flex MLS that it's disclosed as well. But you have to disclose dual and variable rate. It's either a yes or no. The easy way to understand that is, do you have, as a listing agent, is there an agreement with the seller that says, hey, if you represent the buyer as well, do you have an agreement that the compensation is different? And if the answer is yes, then you would put yes under dual and variable rate. If the answer is no, then you would put no. So the idea is for a buyer's agent to be on an even playing field. They can look at the MLS and say, is a prior agreement in place with the seller? And if it says yes, then the buyer's agent understands, okay, looks like they have an arrangement, so I need to make my offer more competitive. If it says no, they may say that there is no prior agreement. This is my little soapbox about this particular issue. My question, if you represent a seller, whether it be at the beginning or at any point in the listing, even if you're under contract, do you as a listing agent have the right to go back to the seller and negotiate your commission? Yes or no? Bueller?
Yes.
Bueller?
Well, as long as you're also negotiating with the brokers. So I just did one where
Assuming you got broker
sent
approval. Assuming you got broker approval.
I would say yes.
Ye-
For example, I don't know. I just say yes.
Okay.
you've got to use that broker to broker commission form and that, but
that-
I would think you can
No,
negotiate
you wouldn't.
anytime.
That's actually incorrect. This has nothing to do with an escrow instruction agreement. Only deals with negotiating the BAC. I'm not talking. I'm not
Oh,
negotiating
yeah,
the
sorry, this is the seller.
I'm saying
Okay.
that the listing agent does the listing agent, assuming the broker will approve it, assuming I will approve it, do they have the right to go back to the seller and say, hey, seller, I know our original agreement was for X. We're not going to change the BAC by any means, but I'm willing to negotiate Y if we do this, if we accept this offer.
Oh, I would think that is
Yes.
breach of fiduciary responsibility because
No, you could do
you've
it.
already got a contract.
Okay, so you're saying you can never go back and negotiate?
Yes,
with
you
the seller?
can.
You can say that
Absolutely
you
you can.
can if it's in the best interest of your seller and you have that conversation with them.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, it's
Well-
up to the seller.
Yeah, the seller, you're right. The seller's in charge here, so
Well, hold on a second.
I don't know.
We're confusing ideas here. So let me cut to the chase. The answer, yes, you can negotiate it. This has nothing to do with breaching any fiduciary duty. If we're going back to the seller and say, hey, seller, I've got a buyer that is willing to make an offer, but I represent the buyer as well. And I'll tell you what, here are all the offers on the table. If you're willing to look, knowing that this other offer here is the buyer, I'm willing to lower the commission from 6 to 5%. That'll help you net more money. And I'm going to, in order to do that, it would be a limited agency, but that'll net you more money. And I'm obviously disclosing, but by doing that, I'm going to receive double compensation here. And so the BAC, let's just say that remained 3, but now my listing commission went from 3 to 2 for a total of 5%. The listing agent can do that all day long. That's no different than at the very beginning when you take the listing. Hey, seller, if I represent the buyer, then I'll take a 5% listing. It's the same thing. So where I'm going with this is where on my soapbox. The NAR tried to put this section here saying that we've got to disclose to create fair dealing with the buying side of a transaction. And I've always thought that this is ridiculous because at any point, the listing agent can always negotiate their commission with the seller. So when I'm representing a buyer and I'm going to a listing agent, I'm like, I have to assume that the listing agent can always negotiate their commission, whether it says yes or no on the MLS. If it says no, that just means they haven't had a prior arrangement. But that listing agent can go back even when they receive my offer and negotiate their commission, not mine, but they can negotiate their commission. So at that point, that listing agent is now having a conversation with the seller to negotiate their commission. And all of a sudden, boom, they lower from 6 to 5 and that agent now represents both sides. So in my opinion, I think this standard of practice is really kind of pointless because we can always assume that the seller and the listing agent can renegotiate it. So why I'm saying this, I would advise you to do this. When you take a listing, when it asks the question on variable and dual and variable rate, my recommendation would be always to check yes. And the reason why is because if you check no and you you actually have a conversation with your seller and you got no identified there, then you're in essence violating this code of ethics. But if you check yes and just say, hey, seller, at some point we can certainly have a conversation about, whether or not I represent both sides, but you're always creating the disclosure of that the conversation of negotiating with the seller is always on the table. And it is always on the table. So that's where I'm going with this. When you fill out your input form, put yes under dual and variable.
Okay, does everybody understand that? Any questions? Okay, I think that was
I have a question.
okay.
Would that open up for down the road, even though there's a contract for that listing agreement, would that open up the opportunity for them to negotiate your commission after it's under contract?
You mean the seller?
Yeah.
No different than the seller always can come back and say, hey, we want to negotiate your commission. And we can say, my commission has nothing to do with this offer. They can always ask whether you put no or yes there. Remember, the seller is not bound by the code of ethics. We are. This is for agents. So whether I have no
Right.
or yes there, the seller, if they feel like they want to have a conversation about the commission that's being offered, they're going to come and ask you.
Okay.
Does
But
that make sense?
with the contract, I could say no. The commission has already been set and agreed upon, so we're going to keep it the way it is.
Yeah. Now, if you're adamant about never changing your commission at all, then sure, go ahead and put no. If you're never going to negotiate your commission, and heck, that's awesome, Nathan. I'll support that all day long. What I'm giving, the reason why I suggest yes is you never know what offer comes on the table or what is presented. And if you felt you needed to go back to the seller, it gives you an opportunity. But yeah.
Yeah, if I was going to double sided, of course I'd be willing to to negotiate it. But okay,
Exactly.
yeah, I was just saying on the listing side, like, would that open it up for my seller to come and try to negotiate a lower commission for me after it's already been set? But I think I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, good. All right, 3.6. Realtors shall disclose the existence of accepted offers, including offers with unresolved contingencies, to any brokers seeking cooperation. So this falls back to the old question. Do I need to disclose whether I have offers on my listing or not? Now, I don't know how Rob feels about this, but my opinion would be, I would add the terminology to this: with the seller's permission, realtors shall disclose the existence of accepted offers, including offers with unresolved contingencies. I'm still of the belief that in order to disclose offers, you need to do so with the permission of your seller. Rob, do you have a different opinion on that?
Well, this goes back to updating things. This one kind of takes care of itself. Just if we've accepted an offer, you're under contract, and we need to make the status change in a timely manner. And I get the fact if it was accepted over a weekend and we don't have, and you don't have broker load or whatever, and the office isn't in place, in that case, we've accepted an offer, and we're under contract at this point. There's that one. I would say that there's no harm in it because that's going to be disclosed regardless.
What about the contingencies though? Because a lot of times I'll ask you when the due diligence deadline date and stuff like that is.
Yeah. I want to give that one more thought. This is maybe we put it, if you guys can remember next week when we do talk about this in the back half of this, I'd like to get some more opinions about that before I say anything. That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jeanette. All right, let's go down to Article 4. We're running out of time, but let's see if we can tackle Article maybe 4, 5, and 6. So Article 4 talks about realtors shall not acquire an interest in or buy or present offers for themselves, any member of their immediate family, their firms, or any members thereof, or any entities in which they have an ownership interest, any real property without making their true position known to the owner or owner's agent or the owner agent broker. In selling property of their own in which they have an interest, realtors shall reveal their ownership interest in writing to the purchaser and the purchaser's representative. So the last half of that talks about owner agent. If you're selling a property that you or your entity has an interest in, you need to disclose the ownership interest in that property. Owner agent, broker owner. That should be done in 3 places in order to be in total compliance, in my opinion. It should be disclosed on the MLS as owner agent, broker owner. It should also be disclosed on the property sign, owner broker, broker owner, owner agent on the property, and then also in the contract with the disclosure of interest. Your ownership position should be disclosed. Rob, do you have any comment on that?
No, that's, yeah, just disclose your owner agent. And that also would apply. I mean, none of us on this call are, but let's say you know someone, and my wife, for example, she has a license that's inactive. Even if you were inactive, you have to disclose that if you're an owner agent, because you still have a license, it's just inactive.
How about on the buyer side, if you represent someone in your family and you're the agent, disclose that as well?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think it's a great question. Is I always look back on and say, is there really harm? I mean, they say, well, what about second cousin, third cousin, fourth cousin? And I look at it and say, well, a lot of that depends on how close you are. I mean, you could have a second cousin, third cousin that is closer than you are with your own brother or sister. And you haven't seen your brother or sister in 30 years, but you see your second or third cousin every single day. And they're more of a sibling than your actual sibling. So I would just look at it and say, anytime if you're thinking whether or not I should disclose, I would say disclose, because what harm does it give?
Yeah, to be on the safe side, disclose. Absolutely. There's no harm in doing it, but you really seem to get really weirded out about disclosing, our relationship with other parties in the transaction. There's really no harm in doing that. So disclose, disclose, disclose. Better safe than sorry. All right.
Except that we have discussed time periods where we don't disclose also in this very class.
Dealing with relationship?
No, it's not under that. It's what we talked about previously. Anyway, I just wanted to remind that we can't think disclosing is always the situation, but under relationship, yes.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about is relationships.
Yeah, we're talking about anything that is legally lawful and we have the authorization of our client. Then if my client is my sibling and they say, don't disclose this, I've got an obligation to disclose that. I'm going to have the conversation with my sibling. I mean, I think that's a little bit, yeah, there's no reason why it shouldn't be disclosed in that avenue. Now, there are times where a client, because they might be famous, and I guess if we're were related to a person in that avenue, they don't want it to be disclosed because they feel like that, just say that one of you are related to John Huntsman. I mean, oh, you're a huntsman yourself. You got to have big bucks. So now you're doing an undisclosed buyer name, and your name happens to be Huntsman. And at that point, disclosure, that's a little bit more challenging question. I'd say come and talk to us. We can work it out. But that's a little bit different scenario versus just letting the parties know that we're related.
Yeah, that's disclosing the name, which isn't what this is about. This is just disclosing the relationship. Yeah.
We've got, I know that this, Ken, we're actually gonna have to wrap up because one thing on this particular link, I think there's another class that jumps right in at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So this login has to be done. So we're gonna actually have to just wrap up right now for this. But hopefully the fact that we were able to text the login out made it easier for everybody. And this is obviously a great topic that we deal with every single day. Ken did a fantastic job. We'll pick up again next week with the remainder part of it.
All right, guys, thanks for your great questions and your participation. And we'll pick this up next week with Article 6. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.